Welcome to Watch Your Mouth,
where therapy meets culture.
where we're real, raw, and rooted in healing. So, somebody walked up to me the other day and they said, I want to be a therapist. How do I do that?
I'm sorry I laughed because so often this happens, right?
People are always walking up to People are always walking up to. Maybe we should also do another episode where we talk about how people are always walking up to you and then filling in the blank.
Exactly. Because I'm like, you're on a plane.
Oh,
People want to talk
the
to
plane. It's like I'm going on vacation.
Listen.
The party.
Yes,
The party. I have a friend.
Yes.
The phone call about I have a friend. I
was
have a friend that
wondering
wants to talk to you.
And so today's a great day for us to talk about.
That's not this episode. This episode is so you want to be a therapist, right? So all the hidden things, actions, behaviors, classes, interpretations that we have when we think that is the route we want to take for our profession.
Yes. So today we want to talk to you all about the official stuff and about the unofficial behind the scenes things that you should be thinking about, that you should be considering. We really appreciated getting some of your questions, and so we hope we can answer those and make this journey a little bit easier for you.
A step-by-step, really structured way in what classes do I need to take, how do I get licensed. I guess that's the
business.
And then behind the scenes includes...
Well, I think today's a great opportunity to talk about the business of becoming a therapist and then talk about the heart and soul of becoming a therapist. And so hopefully today we can have a conversation and share with you all some of our ideas about what that looks like, things that you all should be considering, again, answering some questions that you might have, and talk about our own process and see if maybe there are some similarities between the different ways that we can go about doing this.
And I think those things are kind of interwoven together. They're not separate from each other. I think part of what you mentioned is this idea of what we know, so maybe what's listed on paper as the route to take to become a therapist. And even the word therapist. We could start there and kind of unpack what that really looks like educationally. Because, you know, when you think about a term, counselor, psychotherapist, therapist, mental health practitioner, psychologist, social worker, there's all these ways in which you can become someone who supports another individual or individuals on a path to healing.
Right. So it sounds like you're talking about professions, right? Like which profession interests someone most? How do you start differentiating between which field you want to go into?
Yeah.
And how do we even think about those kinds of things? Because I think about the sort of overarching mental health fields and then the specific professions. I see the professions as cousins.
Okay.
I think that, and maybe that's because I'm biased because I am a family therapist. So my analogies are often family analogies, right? But I see them as cousins, and you know, they're related to each other, but they have different focuses. They have different avenues through which they go about healing. And so it might be helpful for us to talk a little bit about that.
Okay. I like the cousin aspect. I'm a systems person. Although a lot of times when you think about counseling and counselors, you really see them as a professional who sees an individual. And in reality, there's a lot of, like you said, there are a lot of similarities. There's a lot of overlap in many of the fields that define and or support individuals through mental wellness.
Yes. See, and this is why I think this conversation is going to be interesting.
I think so too.
Because I do think that there's lots of overlaps, and I think that there are some specific differences.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I think this is a great opportunity to also own that I am not unbiased. Right? Like, I don't even think you can be in therapy, but then again, in the profession, I also don't think that's the case, right? And so again, I just want to name that I have an expertise in one particular area, and then I have some understanding about some other areas, right? And so I know about family therapy training. I know, you know, in terms of accredited programs, you know, master's and doctoral programs, that my understanding of this field is deep. Whereas my understanding of other fields, I would say, is much more shallow. So I just want to be honest about that.
Yeah, I can also, claim some expertise in counseling. And because of the way counselors have been taught, we have a sprinkling of so many of these other fields. Like, we have an understanding of assessment. We have some clarity and understanding around family therapy. We mainly focus on theories that help guide us to support individuals around their mental health journey. So when you talk about becoming a therapist, I guess the first delineation is type, profession, specialty, focus, education. I mean,
well, I wonder, Dr. Monica, if this would be a great time for you to maybe talk a little bit about your own therapeutic journey. What brought you to the field?
Oh, wow.
And how did you decide which route you were going to take?
I share often with students, I never wanted to be a therapist. I definitely wanted to be a teacher. Mm-hmm. And I think I was happy about being able to merge the two. But therapy was something that followed me through a lot of iterations of who I was before I finally decided, okay, I'm going to take some classes, I'm going to get licensed, and I'm going to start seeing people. So I guess for the most part, I'd always been, and you hear this story often, the individual that people come to ask for advice, to sort through what's happening in their life, to share what's happening, even if I don't want it. Right. And it's very odd, because you'll find yourself in places that don't lend themselves to any kind of intimacy or confidentiality. Sometimes it's at a party or in the grocery store.
Wait. Just my favorite is in the bathroom.
Oh my goodness.
That's my favorite, is when someone somehow you get pulled into some moment in time in somebody's life when you're just like, I was just reaching for the paper towels.
That's it. That's it.
But tell me about your mom.
Right. I'm in line at the grocery store, reaching for a magazine. A woman turns to me and says, "You look like someone I can trust." Mm-hmm. I've been holding this for a long time, and I'm bracing myself for some real general statement. And it turns into a conversation about how she really needs to figure her life out. The next thing I know, a half an hour later, we're sitting on a bench outside of the grocery store talking about things that need to be different in her life. And I find that, as funny as these stories are now, they were happening to me often. Mm-hmm. And finally I thought to myself, is there a way to get paid for this? Because not that I wanted to do that for a living. I definitely did not originally want to do this for a living.
That's so fascinating.
I did not want to sit and listen to someone. I'm the type of person that I want to talk. Mm-hmm. I want to tell you about what's going on with me. I want you to be interested. I want to sound like I'm funny, and I want you to laugh even when it's not. I want you to want to hang out with me, go have dinner. I want that type of interaction. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to get that if I became a therapist. If I was a counselor, there'd be no way I'd be able to open up and talk about myself, share what's happening in my life, give you information that I want you to help me sort through. Mm-hmm. It's a very one-sided practice. And so when we talk about what is hidden, I think that's something you have to think about. If you're the type of person that wants to give advice, or you want someone to hear how you're similar to them, mm-hmm. or you spend just as much time talking about yourself as the other person does talking about themselves, this is not the field.
No.
This ain't that, as they say.
Exactly. Well, my thing is, the first thing that you named, Ron, giving of advice, right? Because that's one of the places that people always assume that if you're going to get into this field, this is an opportunity to give advice. And it's not. As you were saying, this field requires big ears and a small mouth.
Like that.
Right? Like
that image.
It's not equal. It doesn't mean that we don't offer something.
Sure.
But big ears. And so I think it's so fascinating to hear you say, like, that's not the thing that drew you being the therapist isn't what drew you, but it's specifically because your degree is in counselor education. That education drew you first.
Yeah.
Could you talk more about that? Because I'm assuming that must be connected to why you chose counselor education then. When you could have chosen social work,
That's true.
Psychology,
That's true.
marriage
That's
and family
true.
therapy.
That's true.
I don't know. The other thing.
Yeah, psychology in general. I think I've always believed that having an educational path, a path to helping someone else understand something, also helps me understand something. So when I think about my identity, I really think about how those two manifestations of what I wanted to create for myself really merge into who I am. That is my identity. I'm an educator at heart. My lineage is educators, aunts, mom, and I believed that when I finally understood that counseling wasn't really about what's wrong with me and I needed to identify and fix that, I think the natural path was this, it opened up a world for me. It was this idea that, wow, I could be a counselor and I could also educate individuals on counseling. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, I think you did. The thing is, and here's I guess I'm sitting here thinking, how many questions am I going to ask you, right? Because my two sides, right? My therapist side and my educator side, I think one of the other skills that you need to have is that you need to be able to ask 10 questions about every single thing that's happening. And so that's 20 questions off the bat right away that I have for you in this process. And I'm like, but what does our audience most need to hear? Because I've got so many curiosities.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that we could just spend a minute or two on, because I think it's less about the curiosity, because I have a curiosity about a lot of things, and more about how you can help the person tell the story. You want to take the thread and make the thread longer before you attempt to help them gain some insight or answer some questions.
Well, if you don't understand, how could you attempt to try to figure out what's the tapestry that you're creating with the thread if you don't understand it?
Yeah.
And one of the things I say to my students, and I know I definitely said this last semester, especially to my first year master students, is that part of the work of becoming a good therapist isn't to figure it out first. This isn't a detective show when you're sitting there going, oh, I'm gonna figure this out, I'm gonna get it, right? That's not what our goal is. That our goal is to walk alongside clients, to guide them. I want my clients to understand it. And I truly believe that part of that process is hearing yourself speak, right? Like that there's a process of, I've been thinking about this, I've been keeping this inside, but when I really give voice to something, that there's power in that. And then I get to hear it and go, did I say what I mean? Did I mean what I said? Oh, hold on. Let me edit as I'm talking it through, right? And that's a gift. And so there's your own curiosity. I'm a nosy person. I've got lots of curiosities, which to me is still different than how do I sift through the curiosity so that the question that I'm asking is geared towards, okay, what are my clients needing in this moment? How do I give them, like you said, more thread in that story to make sense of their own experiences, to hear it out loud, and I kind of keep, in some ways, like the ball of yarn, right? Like I'm just holding this ball of yarn that they're kind of pulling from. Right? And so which is partly why I'm like, oh, I've got a billion questions I could ask you, and what would be my purpose in asking those questions?
Absolutely, because they're putting together the story. And I think as a counselor, the evolution of counseling really lends itself to an understanding that a lot of times for me as a counselor educator, I'm helping students unlearn this idea that there's a hierarchy when they're sitting across from a person, like that they know the answer and it's not just them giving the information to the other person. So it's alleviating this idea that I have to know the answer. I have to be able to give really good advice. This person has to change in front of me. And if they don't, somehow I'm not doing a good job. So I think that's the other piece of it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's an unlearning and a re-education.
Absolutely. Because I mean most people didn't really get good information about what therapy is in the first place.
Yeah.
That so often the first ways that people have gotten understandings of it has been around, pop culture and the media and things like that, and on TV or in the movies, right? People are having these big therapeutic moments, these big light bulb moments, right? Like there's a talk show where it's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, now my whole life is different, right?
After this 1 hour.
Yes. If that, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I'm like, no, in real life, there's parts of therapy that are very boring, right? And I still find therapy interesting when I say this, but like it's not this big moment of this big revelation, but it really is that listening, that hearing, that retelling of the story. And so it's a slow process. I think that's what I mean by boring, right?
Yeah, because slow is fast, fast is slow, slow is fast. So if you attempt to speed up a process for an individual, you're really taking away their opportunity to really understand and to integrate their own understanding of what they're saying and sharing, and you take away their power.
Right.
Like you take away my chance to understand who I am and the power that comes from that.
Right. Which is why I think that this process of moving away from advice when you first think about becoming a therapist is such an important thing, right? Because just like you were saying, how often across your lifespan before becoming a therapist were you listening to folks ask you your opinion, you give advice, and folks do what they want, right? Like, let's be honest, if giving advice worked, problems would be solved like this, and we would be out of a job, right? And my goal with my clients, as a side note, is always to work myself out of a job, right? Like, I want my clients to graduate. But I spent a lot of time, right, like giving advice before I was trained to become a therapist, and most of the time it's not what somebody wanted, right? They didn't want me to tell them how to fix it. They wanted an opportunity to figure out their own process, to figure out and make adjustments in their own life, to try something out, to see what worked, what didn't work, come back, talk about it, look at it from another perspective, right? That there's a lot of, like you said, power and ownership that comes from figuring it out with support, versus someone just telling you this is the answer.
And that was a way to shut people down. If I told you the answer or told you what I believed you needed to do, I'm really stopping you from processing what you're thinking about. I'm also trying to live your life for you. I've decided that, I know better. I mean, and that has been the true evolution of the counseling field. We had to move away from this idea that somebody did know better. If we think fundamentally about how counseling evolved from, the Freudian lens, this psychoanalytic approach of there is this white man who is telling this person, you do have things wrong with you, stemming from your history, so I'm going to help you move through that and become a better person. When we move away from that and we understand contextually some of the things that we bring to a real conversation is people don't want to hear that.
Well, I mean, like you said, there's an assumption then that therapist is the only one that knows what the right and the wrong way is.
Yes.
Right? And that they are putting that prescription on you that this is your only way to be a better person. Right? And I'm sorry, who do you think you are?
Right.
Because you're certainly not about to tell me something.
In an hour, though. I keep going back to the time frame.
Well,
so let's be honest. One of the best hidden secrets is that this is not a 60-minute hour. And I think that's first and foremost we have to start. It's a 53 to 55-minute hour. And so we're already, alleviating time, but we're in the context of a person's life have such a small sliver. Most, if not all of the work is done outside of where you are with the therapist for that once a week.
Absolutely.
53 to 55-minute time slot.
Absolutely. And let's be honest, right? Most therapists are not under the impression that this magical amount of time is somehow clinically significant, right? That these are the ways in which we are limited by larger structures, right? That the therapeutic hour was not designed by therapists to say this is what's most clinically appropriate, but it was designed by insurance companies to say that this is the most cost effective.
Yeah.
And so, back in the day when we had less reliance on insurance, we had more room to actually say, what does the client need? And so then how do I structure myself around it? But I think we're still so limited in these ways. And so there's lots of things that we could do to challenge the idea of a magical time in therapy, like you said. that the majority of the work that happens is happening outside, and we only get, I'm so glad you said that, we only get this little window into the client's lives that they give us, and we want to help them maximize that, right? Like we want to help them, again, make connections in their lives that are impactful, that are meaningful, and give them encouragement and support to test this out in their real lives.
Yeah.
Because this hour of time that we've got, again, it's just a sliver. So we recognize that that's the case, and that it's a privilege to be given an opportunity to peek into it.
So before we get too far, I'm really curious about your journey to becoming a therapist, because you speak very highly of marriage and family therapy.
Well, yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Why be in a field if you don't love the field, right?
True.
And that's not to say that I think it's perfect, because I don't. Similar to what you're saying and what you shared, I feel like I think there's two ways to become a therapist, right?
Okay.
Like I think that there are folks who want to learn the skills of therapy and who kind of come in going, hey, I think there are some therapeutic skills that for this career and for this field that I want to figure out.
Okay.
And then I think that there are people who are called to the field. And I do think that there's a way in which becoming a good therapist can be a calling around how you want to serve people, how you want to be in the business of co-creating healing. And so I think I was called into the field. I think that, I know generationally, similar to what you were saying, that I have healers generationally in my family, right? My mother is a nurse. Most of my aunts on both sides of my family are nurses. The generation above that, I have a grandfather who was a healer. We didn't talk that much about that, right? In terms of trying to do good spiritual and good root work, right? Generation above that who participated in healing practices and healing rituals. And so I know that that's been passed down. And so as a kid, people were constantly talking to me about their problems, right? I was 11 years old, and I have, teenagers from church talking to me about dating and what do I think about what the process is like, right? You have family members who are talking about problems with their kids, problems with their spouse, right? My parents at times recruited me into, your father did this, or, your mom did da-da-da-da, right? Or even, how they should parent my other siblings, right? People ask me for my opinion a lot. And again, people didn't always take my opinions. And at that time, in my own arrogance, is it fully arrogance? I was like, if you would have just done what I said.
I think it is arrogance.
Of course it's arrogance. That's all ego, right? And a little bit of experience. But I had lots of these opportunities where folks were asking me to listen, right? And so sometimes they asked me for advice, but lots of times people just wanted to be listened to. And I think that, like you said, that's an important part of recognizing what are the skills of the field and what does it mean to sort of show up and balance the things that you have to say with the ways in which you use your ears to listen, and you create an environment that says you can talk about things. And so when I learned to become a therapist, one of the hardest skills that I had to learn was also how to turn it off, because going through training meant my therapeutic skills were on all the time. And so I still remember one of my best friends was dating this guy, and it was her birthday. I think we were getting together, so we're playing cards, and somehow I asked some kind of question, and he opened up about his dad that had died recently. He started talking about their relationship, and I'm in this serious conversation, and I remember she pulled me to the side after a good 20 minutes and was like, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
And I remember I was so stunned because I wasn't
doing anything.
Yeah, right?
According to you.
I wasn't doing
the way
anything.
You thought about it, yeah.
But I hadn't figured out that dial yet, right?
Yep.
And so I was actively listening, which is different, right?
Yeah.
And so many people don't have an experience of someone who actively listens.
Yes, building a real relationship where somebody can be heard and seen and can continue talking without interruption or diversion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the power of that, right? Because it doesn't feel like I'm doing anything major, but I'm holding space. Yeah. And it was this is not the right context for that. This is supposed to be a fun party. We're playing spades, and we weren't even playing yet, right? We were just setting up.
The cards. That's all all we want to do, deal the cards and play the game.
Oh my goodness. And so I had to like apologize and figure out what did I just do?
Because and how do you close that back up? Because that's the other thing. When you open a person up in a situation that is not therapeutic and is not safe, it is not confidential, how then do you help put them back together, put the rose-colored glasses back on, as we say, and send them back out into the real world? So if you open a person up in a context where there is no safety, you cannot guarantee what happens next, then you may be leaning into an area where you're doing harm.
Well, yeah, like someone has become vulnerable.
Right.
And now there isn't, like you said, they're zipping up. And so I know I didn't zip back up. Now I'm feeling embarrassed, but I'm feeling bad also. Like, oh my goodness.
Now you're carrying that weight up.
Right, because I was like, did I just do something to hurt you? But I didn't mean to. But it also seemed like you wanted to talk about this because you also took the space.
Of course we want to talk about it.
Right? And so it was such an interesting process. And so I really think that learning, like, that's the kind of thing that I think has to come alongside with being called and then learning some of the additional pieces so that it's responsive. You can respond in an ethical and appropriate and responsible way to the call.
Yeah.
And so, you know, but when I think about the business of becoming a therapist, that happened a little bit differently for me.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Because I did the traditional thing I thought you were supposed to do, right? I went to college and I studied psychology. And I gotta tell you, I found most of my psychology classes to be extremely boring. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm not that interested in what's happening with the brain. I'm not that interested in certain aspects of it in the classes that were my required classes. And then I found out about human development and family studies. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Now we're actually talking about people.
Yep.
And I was like, now that's what I'm talking about. And if I hadn't been so scared, I would have changed my major. But I was rigid in my thinking at that point. So I was like, well, I'll just minor in this. But that's where all my energy was. Because I care about people and I care about relationships. And so initially I thought, okay, I'm going to do psychology for undergrad. I'm going to apply to a psychology graduate program because that's what I knew to do.
Right. And
then when I get out, I'm going to work with couples.
Okay. And that's what you thought.
That's what I thought was the only route. It was like suffer. Honestly, my thought was suffer through this stuff that you don't care that much about. Doesn't really matter that much to you. And then when you're done, you can do the thing that matters, right?
Wow.
And so, thankfully, Earl Merritt was my advisor at Penn State.
Name and names.
Okay, listen, Mr. Merritt. Oh, he still works at Penn State, mind you. Okay. He is wonderful. Or does he still work there? Or did he recently retire? I don't know. He was wonderful. But he came back from a conference, and on the back of his door was the conference badges. And so people have come into my office before and asked me why I have conference badges on the back of my door, and I have it because of Mr. Merritt. He had been my advisor my whole entire time at Penn State, and so this is my senior year. I'm like prepping for GREs, and I'm trying to figure out like what's gonna go on. How do I apply for grad school? And I'm randomly like, oh, what's this behind your door? And he was like, oh, I went to the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy conference. And I said, excuse me, what? Could you say that again? He said, oh yeah, marriage and family therapy. I'm sorry, sir. I'm gonna need you to slow down and give me more details. He was like, oh yeah, it's a field where you special. All the things that you're doing are for working with couples and for working with families. I've been a member.
Wow.
I'm like, how? So I had to get past some of my feelings about why did you keep this a secret from me?
Yeah.
Because that's how it felt, right? It felt like a secret.
Yeah.
And I was so grateful. He was like, oh, check out their website. And so I did.
This was at the end of undergrad.
This was my senior year.
Okay.
I had senioritis. Let's be very clear. So I was also, and like I said, I was not good at changing trajectories. Otherwise, I would not have majored in psychology. And I was like, oh, I can't do this. I went on that website and I found out I could just study the thing that I'm most passionate about.
Wow.
And I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. I'm like, oh, okay, there's COMFT accredited schools. Let me like dive into this world. And I was like, this is where I want to be. This is what we're talking about in my HDFS classes. How do people choose partners? What are all the different components that come into that, right? Yeah. In general, what do we learn works and is helpful and healthy in families? Okay, what have we been taught to believe is what's healthy and helpful, but turns out isn't? What's going on with attachment? And not just the theory of attachment, right? But again, how it shows up between us.
Yeah.
right? Because again, I wasn't interested in this head stuff, but what I really care about is the relationships. And so how I make sense of the world is from that systems perspective that says, wait a minute, if change is happening, there's different kinds of change that can happen that impacts everyone in your relational constellation. And that there's a lot of power in that, a lot of growth in that, right? That I don't know a way of being in this world that is independent and unattached. I've said this before to my students, and I'll say it here, right? I came into this world attached to my mother. I don't know a way of being in this world that is not relational.
Yeah.
So then how would health and healing not be relational as well?
Yeah, that's so interesting. You know, as you talk about that, I'm thinking about my own trajectory and how during undergraduate school my thought was I'm going to teach, right? So my focus was just on education and how to set up a classroom and things you do. Then I leaned into speech pathology. So it was helping students that had extra needs in a classroom learn how to articulate, learn how to utilize their hearing aid while they spoke. Then I recognized that there was something missing, and I wasn't sure what it was, but throughout my internship in speech and language pathology in undergrad, parents continued to come to me to talk about how difficult it was to raise a child that needed more than most of the educational systems, but also specifically their classrooms could offer them. You know, how do they also navigate how they feel at a loss to support them through these things? And so I recognized that even in education, I was helping individuals learn about how they felt about things, how the way they perceive things needed to change to incorporate how they could navigate different situations differently, how, you know, these interactions and engagements they had with their kids influence the child, not just at the home, but outside of the home, both in the classroom, but outside of the classroom, and these other relationships, how there is this connection to how I behave with my partner that's in the household, my mom that might be in the household, it might be an intergenerational household, and how that looks to my kids, but also not just what I say, but what I do with my kids, and how all of these things impact how they feel about themselves. And I thought, there's something about this that might be connected. And so my journey to counseling was really about attempting to inform parents on how they navigate the educational system. At least that's what I originally thought. So I'm looking at these programs and trying to find a way to get some understanding on, you know, how to do an interview, how to change a person's perspective. Like, one person at a time was the original training that I received in counseling when I went to graduate school. And this was after I graduated and started working a little bit in the school system, thinking to myself, okay, do I take this test to become an educator, or do I continue on this educational route, which, by the way, I didn't necessarily want to, but I was more curious than not about how I help this evolution of speaking to people, engaging with people, how I help this be supported. And I found my way to counseling, not to social work. I learned about systems later, not to understanding an individual's context. I learned that also much later. The way I was trained was this idea of one person at a time, and all you're working through is what they're bringing in. You're not connected to or understanding how there are all these layers and parts of a person that they're connected with, these burdens that they're carrying from their history, as you put it, the constellation of their family, how a family system is like a mobile. So you're plucking one piece of the mobile and you think that things aren't going to change or shift or be redirected. And I think there is a certain amount, you know, when I was in my PhD program, a certain amount of unlearning that I had to do that brought me up to speed to understanding how part of what has to happen is understanding this context. You got to know the system that the person comes from. They don't just walk into the room alone.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
Right? Like we do not function that way as human beings. And so I know this is like an old movie reference, right? But there is a reason why in that movie Castaway with Tom Hanks, right?
Yeah.
That we are not built to move in isolation.
Yeah.
And so even when you are isolated and you are shipwrecked, he had to have Wilson. He had to have something else that could represent another being, right? It was a volleyball.
Yeah.
Right? The Wilson volleyball.
Yeah.
Right? Because you need to relate to someone else in some kind of way.
That's how you learn about yourself.
Who are you? Not in context. Not in relationship, right? And so I think
even if you live alone, you still have a history of all of these other people you interface with.
Yes.
Grocery store, riding the subway, going to work.
But what made you live alone?
Yeah.
Also. Right? Because that is impacted by the family that you came from and the family that you're able to create, right? True. Some folks are able to build big friendship constellation bonds, and some folks aren't, right? And what we know is that, you only need one or two good friends in order to feel centered and well, but not everyone also learned how to be a good friend, right? And so again, we're not just talking about biological relationships here. We're talking about friendships. We're talking about partners, right? We're talking about, families, our biological families and the families that we, that we can become adopted to, can become connected to. We're talking about kinship, right? Because
sister friends.
Exactly. Because we know so much of our family structures are not just based on blood, but they are absolutely based on love.
Absolutely.
Right? I'm like, my whole church family that I had growing up, there are people who are still in my life to this day, and I wish somebody would try to tell me something, right? Like it's not. It's
what
not
you mean
possible.
They're not related to me? They are my family.
I'm not exactly sure what your question is, right? Like how are we doing this? And so I think that and I appreciate you naming, right? Like our context is so important to who we are, how we are, and we could keep broadening that out, right? Because you were talking about our school systems, our work environment, the town that we live in, right? The city, our state, our country, right? How do these things impact who we are and how we're allowed to show up, right? The time period that we're born, right? Everybody's talking about which generation you are, boomers and Gen X and Gen Y and Alpha and all that. On one hand, it doesn't matter, and on the other hand, it matters a lot around what we believe, right? Where we come from, the experiences that we had, and then that shows itself up in how we again relate to each other. Because if I believe the stereotype about you, how am I going to move? Versus if I wonder what's true specifically to you, right, then I might come into the relationship in a more open and curious way. And that's what I think is part about this process of becoming a therapist, right? Is the fact that we bring our own personal, unique stories into the process, and we also learn how to look at other people's stories. We're learning, how to be curious about them. Sometimes we're teaching clients to be curious about themselves because they weren't given that practice to wonder about, well, why did I make that decision? Where did that idea come from? Why do I feel disappointed or hurt in this moment? What might make me feel better, right? Like permission to slow down and to be curious about themselves.
That also includes a curiosity around the disconnection from what they may be feeling. So this idea of, I'm not sure how I feel about that, is really connected to, I've never been given time or permission to be able to connect with the feeling about that.
Exactly.
And so if we were to slow down long enough, and maybe you don't have the language verbally, but you have the emotional impact. Yeah.
Absolutely. Right? Like when your stomach is real clenched, right? Your shoulders are up to your ears. That means
holding
something.
Your breath.
Right? Oh my goodness, how many people don't take deep breaths into the diaphragm, right? These shallow breaths because I'm always feeling X, Y, and Z, right? Giving folks an opportunity to then, again, drop your shoulders, learn how to take that deep belly breath, wonder and be curious about, wait a minute, I've been carrying that tension in my back for such a long time, right? I feel stressed. So many folks are under the impression that stressed is a feeling. Yeah. And it's something we feel, but it's not an emotion.
Correct.
And again, it's not you're wrong, but did you have any time or space or support in connecting the feeling in the body to what the emotion could be? Right? And it's okay to not know. And learning how to become a therapist means you also get opportunities to help people be more in touch with what's happening in their bodies, be more in touch with what are they thinking, how is that connected, learn these new things, learn additional language. and then figure out, well, how does this then shake out at work, with your friends, with your family, with your partner, waiting for the bus, in the grocery store, right? Like how do we impact each other? And so I think, again, we're biased, obviously, but I think that this is powerful work.
Don't forget to like this video
and hit the subscribe
to watch your mouth.
Take care.
Yes.
Okay. So hopefully this was helpful to you if you're thinking about becoming a therapist. So let us know down in the comments. What other questions do you have? What other wonderments are you thinking about? And is there something that we didn't talk about that we should have talked about? Let us know.
Yeah, because we want to tell you those secrets that, are behind the academic wall, that we may be able to share with you through our own academic experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for joining us on Watch Your Mouth.